Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. Now, normally I would be saying welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast with Scott and Dan, but tonight will be one of the rare instances where we are Dan-free, or Dan-less. It's an un-Dan podcast. But never fear, you're not going to be stuck just listening to me yammer on, which you kind of do anyway when you listen to our podcast. We have a special guest with us, filling in for Dan. So let me get that introduction out of the way right now. I'll even do the little contrasting thing that people don't care for, but I do it anyway. So the Atticus Finch to my Saul Goodman, or the Matlock to my blockhead. We are being joined by Brian Hewlett tonight. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, thanks for having me, Scott.
Now, a handful of our listeners actually already know who Brian is. He's one of our listeners, and you're also a well-established lawyer in the land of Kentucky, hence my legal contrasting there. But I'm excited that you are joining us tonight. I actually met you in person for the first time just a couple weeks ago, and that was quite the experience for at least one of us, I would say.
It was really neat to meet you and Dan, to all be in the same place and meet you and get to talk about the things that I often hear on the podcast. So I'm honored that you asked me to join you.
Oh, please. After spending the weekend with folks like with you specifically, it made me go, wow, he's the guy who should be having the podcast, not a marble mouthed moron like me, or even dozing Dan or something. So Dan wasn't able to record tonight. He's been feeling a little out of it and trying to catch up on things, and it's kind of been that way to a certain degree this season for us doing this podcast. So he was the one to suggest Brian kind of take over. I don't know. This may be a one-time only deal. It may be something we might do for the rest of the season, depending on how Dan feels and depending on your schedule. We shall see. So it's a test project, but I already feel good about it. And as a special treat, possibly, depending on our respective energy levels and how much saliva we've expended talking about Legion and how long we go on for it, if we both feel up to it, we may very well do an additional segment at the end of the podcast about a certain other FX TV show, which is coming to its hopefully amazing conclusion next week. I assume anyone who's listening knows what I'm talking about. If not, I'm talking about The Americans. What else am I talking about?
I thought you were talking about Atlanta, Scott. You fooled me.
I know you have been pressing me to watch Atlanta, and I will. I know it's one of those. I know it's a good show. I will see it. I just haven't gotten to it yet. I'm amazed that I actually watched 4 episodes of The Crown the other night. Finally, after putting it off for a month and a half. So, and it was really good. But we're not. Right now, we're not supposed to be talking about that, and we're not supposed to be talking about The Americans. We are here to catch up on, good Lord, once again, 2, not 1, but 2 episodes of Legion. However, before we get to the last couple, which I believe are chapters 15 and 16, people are going to have to strain their brain to remember now, I actually do have some more thoughts on chapters 13 and 14. So let's go to my segment that we haven't really done as much this season, which I used to always call More Thoughts on the Last 2 Weeks' Worth of Episodes. Now, you're all going to have to really think way far back at this point, because I'm going all the way back to chapter 13. Just an observation, maybe pretty obvious, just wanted to say it out loud here. I've been assuming that Farouk only exists as far as a physical form that we're seeing in some sort of astral plane. Other than that, in the quote-unquote real world, he's essentially been using vessels, such as, Lenny last season, and now really been using Oliver. Which is, hey, that's why he's looking for his actual body, which presumably looks like the form that we've seen him take in this other plane of existence. I mean, obviously, when he's talking, when we see scenes of him talking, like, to say Oliver, that's how we're seeing it, but it's really, I'm assuming that's really what's happening inside Oliver's head more than anything else. So, since Farouk cannot take his own physical form, thus when Oliver is killing Amy in that chapter 13 and turning her into Lenny, that truly is Farouk doing it and acting through Oliver, which really better explains Oliver's very cold detachment about the way he's going about things, because I don't think that's a manifestation of Oliver's personality. That's more Farouk in that instance, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I have struggled with the Amy, Lenny, the differentiation of who's who and who needs a body, who doesn't need a body. It's been pretty interesting, but I thought the way the episode you're referring to ended, the way it showed that, I think your assessment's dead on, and that's how I saw it, and sort of explained what we've seen of the usually gregarious character of Oliver being, very different than we see him typically.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I also, and again, because I thought, way back when we were going to do this podcast at least a week earlier or so some of these things might have gone by the wayside, but I'm going to say them anyway because I don't care. I actually had a bit of a, for lack of a better phrasing, a crackpot prediction that related to that episode, and it was based on how Amy was talking about her so-called waking dream that had like Admiral Fukuyama and the Vermilions in it, and the way she kept talking about them. I was going to predict that we will see Amy as a Vermilion before the scene is over, right down to the mustache. I almost want to walk that back now, because now I don't think it's going to happen, but I just love the idea so much, I'm still going to say it. It probably won't happen, but I think we still could get a crazy flash of that just for some reason. Just to see her in a mustache, I think might happen.
It makes me want to rewatch the Vermilions in the Hall and see if there's an Amy in there somewhere.
Oh, nice. I'm pretty sure if someone had slipped that out. Well, no, actually, I wouldn't know, because, people aren't really focusing on that. Okay, so that was all I had to really say about Chapter 13. Now, about that Chapter 14. Now, that was the one, it's a little easy to remember once I say what it was about. That was the one with the multiple Davids. And I was giving it some more thought. Now, I know when we discussed it, or I discussed it, or me and Dan discussed it, whatever, was it last week or a week or two ago, however many weeks ago it was now, I've lost track. It's like an old Mr. Show bit about people calling, the previous week's show or whatever. It was essentially boiled down to an episode, the way we discussed it, that featured alternate universe versions of David, as well as essentially including the one that we know. But I thought about it some more, and I'm wondering if maybe we might have simplified it a little too much, which is kind of bizarre, because anything dealing with alternate universes or timelines is rarely, quote-unquote, simplified. But I'm kind of wondering if there was a lot more going on with that episode, whether it be, look, to a slight or an extreme degree, I thought that all the versions that we saw seem to incorporate different aspects of David. And we know that David already has, we know he's already kind of split in two, so he's already got a bit of a, they've have a running thing with the schizophrenia going on in his head, where the multiple Davids talking to each other. They've had that in a number of episodes now, including one of the episodes we're going to be talking about a little bit later in the podcast. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, back when we were podcasting on season 1, I think we discussed the fact that, this is a character who has had all these voices in his head, and it wasn't just simply the Shadow King or his psychic abilities. And many said that even the title Legion may in fact refer to the legion of voices or personalities that may be contained in David's head. So I was kind of, just to spitballing here, that thinking like all these versions we saw almost to a certain extent represent different voices in his head, different Davids that all encompass or become part of the same person. And I know that sounds a little crazy when you start getting into, whoa, what about the old man version or the invalid, or it's like, yeah, but that's still, I still think that's still part of the same fabric of what makes David David. I think that again, it may not be all that brilliant at all, but my mind was in that place. I wanted to spit it out on a podcast.
Well, I sort of had a similar thought, now that we've seen, future Sid, that there are these possibilities clearly, as we see discussed in these episodes. And could one of those Davids or another David be the one that ends up with her? And if something shifts, none of that ever happens, right?
Right.
So I do think at the time watching it, you sort of had a sense of like there was a defined past, present, and future of David presented in that episode.
Yes.
But the way that this show plays with point of view and unreliable narration, I think there probably is something more to it.
Right. I mean, for example, the older David who becomes one of the most powerful and richest people in the world, or the richest person in the world. He's also very clearly not a nice person at that point. And in a way, it seems like that could be the closest manifestation of the David that we're kind of dreading might be where his character could eventually lead, where David, in fact, becomes the villain as opposed to the hero of the piece, which is actually discussed in one of these episodes that we're going to talk about.
I have that point precisely that on something that I thought about to talk about.
Excellent. All right. Well, that's pretty much all I wanted to say about chapters 13 and 14, which aired, 18 months ago? Whatever. But now we should really get down to the last 2 episodes. Sorry, guys, another double episode. So let's buckle down, buckle up, buckle in, whatever the phrase is, as we discuss chapters 15 and 16 of Legion. Now, obviously, starting off at chapter 15, let's talk about how that episode started off, because we got yet another John Hamm narrated PSA, or I think on the internet they have all these different ways to refer to them. They're little bits of educational announcements or analogies, or whatever, which is not even the correct phrase. I've just been calling them PSAs. I don't know why. But another one about the human condition. But before that, the episode actually starts off with yet another tongue-in-cheek nod at the, as you just were saying, the questionable reality of the series. Now, is
this the ostensibly
yes.
on Legion?
Yes.
Yeah, I found that interesting.
I love that because, a week before that, you had apparently on Legion, and then with chapter 15 it was ostensibly on Legion. I confess I was not paying attention. I did not notice if they did that for chapter 16. I don't think they did a previously in any way for chapter 16. Did they? I don't think they did.
I don't believe so, but now I will have the opportunity to be corrected if I'm wrong. So I will join you in saying I don't think so.
I don't think they did. But it does make me kind of think what they could conceivably do for future episodes. So I started listening, they could do supposedly on Legion. They could do allegedly on Legion. They could do seemingly on Legion. Reportedly on Legion. Presumably on Legion. They could just do, hey, maybe on Legion. The thing I also find funny about this, the more I thought about it, obviously it, again, plays to the fact that the show, as you were just saying, has been a lot about the unreliable narrator and the fact that the viewer should question what they're seeing, much the way David constantly questions what he sees as well. I had a point and I forgot what I was going to...
Well, I was going to say, I think that to bounce off that, the interesting thing about David's condition and what we've seen is I think the show has done a pretty good job with some of the recent episodes of making us not sure what's happening, not sure what people are doing, not sure what their motives are. And I think in a way has really sort of given us the feeling that you would believe David himself would have struggling with those issues. And I think all those, seeing flashes, images, things that you're not sure what they mean. You don't know if this person is in that body or this body. I think all those things sort of give you a sense of the idea of David's own ability sometimes, which is compromised, to work through those things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I would agree with that. So getting back to the actual episode as opposed to the little thing before the episode. Oh, I know. I just remembered the point I wanted to make. I've noticed now, having watched 3 seasons worth of Fargo, and now watching, now we're into the 2nd season of Legion. There are certain things Noah Hawley likes to do. Whether he's specifically the main writer of an episode or not, or whether he's actually behind the camera, because I think he did direct the Multiple David one, if I'm not mistaken. He likes to play not just with the openings in a creative or artistic way, but he likes to also question the idea of reality or truth. Because as anyone who watched Fargo knows, even when you go all the way back to the original movie, it starts off with the conceit like this is based on a true story, when we know full well it's not.
Right.
Right. And they definitely play with that on Fargo very heavily in the 3rd season. Even the way they have the words kind of disappear. It's already making it questionable. That was what I want to say. Anyway, back to the episode. So again, the John Hamm PSA. I should come up with another way to phrase it. The Haminator. In that one, it was about the conceit or the concept. Someone can't read my notes. The concept of moral panic, and we're given a little thing on how it can range throughout history, from the literal witch hunts hundreds of years ago to even like the hysteria over horror comic books back in the 1950s. It's pretty much par for the course with the way these PSAs are always done. We also, at the end of the episode, or towards the end of the episode, I should say, we're kind of given a little rundown of each of the topics that Hamm has covered in almost all these episodes. And he kind of connects the dots for us, which I would have to say felt maybe just a little, I don't know, condescending, maybe. Okay.
Maybe a little too on the nose for what we're used to from this show.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure why anyone would really need to have the thematic elements from each episode reiterated just to show us how they really did mean something after all.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to spend time in the episode, to kind of point something out to us, I'm suspecting most viewers could probably come up with 100 more pressing questions than, hey, could you nutshell all those lessons you've been reeling off, in an easily digestible little Cliff Notes version at the end of this one? I don't know. The funny thing is, the tone that they took with that last part kind of made it feel like, oh, but this is the end of these little narrated lessons. And as we find out in the next episode, nope. we'll get to that, but I was like...
And interestingly enough that you mentioned that, because I had the same thought as I rewatched it and remembered and was reminded that when I watched that, I thought, oh, is that all? They're done with it now. It's the race to the body, and right. That's sort of behind us. The next one raises a series of questions that we'll talk about later.
Right. So, I mean, I do have to confess at this point, and again, obviously, I love the visuals. Obviously, I enjoy hearing John Hamm narrate them because, I'm a big fan of John Hamm, of course, whatever. But it's hard to get away from the fact that you could strip them out of all these episodes, and it really would not impact the season at all. It really, I don't think they've been in any way integral to the series, the season, as far as I'm concerned.
I think the only one that might be essential was the introduction of the delusion sort of bug creature.
Yes, right. Because I played on an element that was actually featured in the show, with the egg and the little creature coming out, which then we saw actually manifest in the show. True. But that's the one.
Right. I mean, that's the only one that's essential, I would believe.
Right. All right. Getting on to the actual meat of the episode, which really, as I recall, gets going with Farouk. We get something which I first thought was more metaphor than reality. You know, as we see him, he's pumping some strange purplish substance into a car, and yet another one of these, white planes of existence that they seem to love doing on the show, like it's some old Chuck Jones cartoon or something. And then we see him seated across a long dinner table from David. Remember the scene now? David has that little angry roar thing because Farouk killed Amy.
Yeah, like a dog.
Wasn't it? I guess it was like a dog. I think when I wrote down a note, I wrote like a lion.
Yeah, but it was an animal growling.
Definitely animal. Definitely non-human. Basically, this way it seemed played out. Farouk is just amused by it, and he just basically decides that David's not ready to play with the big boys, and he's suddenly literally at a little kiddie table. Did you have any thoughts as are these just two like random kids, or did you think that they could actually be like younger versions of anyone on the show or anything like that?
I had the weird thought at the time. That maybe it was David and Amy as kids, because he spins from the table to the keyhole and sees her.
Yep.
So that was my only thought, that maybe, when he says back at the kids' table, maybe he was back at the kids' table with himself and Amy when they were younger.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those things it's one of those we'll never know. So it all depends on how much we choose to read into it.
Right.
And a show like this, like few others, lends itself to reading a lot into things, and and whether it actually means anything or not, it's like Twin Peaks all over again sometimes with this show. The whole seeing Amy through the keyhole, then he actually encounters Amy, who ends up being this rather maniacal, creepy version of Amy. So just showing Farouk is one dark, twisted son of a bitch, pretty much.
Oh, totally. But the interesting thought I had watching this again is they went to great pains in the way they shot and framed Farouk, that they made him appear at all times very calm and very cool. And David was the one out of control, burdened by the emotion of what had just happened. But they really painstakingly made Farouk like the calm one, the rational one in the scene.
Right. I mean that's the interesting thing about the way they portrayed Farouk. I mean, they've kind of, that's been his way the entire time.
Right.
I mean, we haven't seen him in any way, shape, or form get emotional or even annoyed about anything, which he always seems to be smirking and or have a slight feeling of amusement about whoever he's dealing with, unless he's just like waving them off or something.
So I'm curious your thought on this. What's your thought on the actor playing Farouk? Because as it's went on, I found that I like his performance more and more.
Oh, I think he's doing a fine job with, everything from handling, the different languages and accents. And also it's interesting because we're watching an actor act, and the vast majority of the time he's wearing sunglasses. So, which denies him the ability to act with his eyes, which is kind of an important thing when you're acting normally. Again, it's kind of what you were just saying. He also provides a very nice contrast to David, because they're very much opposite sides of the same coin, which really makes the whole hero-villain thing very interesting. Especially the more emotional and off-kilter David has been getting, especially, after his sister being killed off.
Right.
So, yeah, I am enjoying his performance. I mean, I tend to enjoy all the performances on Legion. That's one thing I would not fault the show for. People usually bring their A game. It just depends on whether they're given the opportunity to really demonstrate how good they are or not, which will be an issue I will talk about later. But
well, I thought my thought of it is originally when Farouk and Oliver were together, and Farouk was taking more of the spotlight than Oliver, we liked that actor and that character so much that I was kind of like, man, I want to see more of Oliver and less of Farouk.
Right.
But now, like, I'm okay with more Farouk because I think they've developed that character in a really good way.
Yes. Especially when they were getting into the stuff, where they start hinting at his origins, and they make references. Well, he talks about, what happened, whatever, hundreds of years ago. But he kind of talks about, not much of a spoiler here, but for comic book people, the person who actually took him down was Professor X from the X-Men.
Right.
It's the character who's been referenced a number of times on the series, but they've never actually out and out said who it is, even though if you know X-Men stuff, you know damn well who they're talking about.
Right.
I think they've used the word professor at least once or twice, and they've done other little things, like little visual hints. I think in the drawings, I think they did something with the wheelchair or something once upon a time.
And I think it doesn't the lady driver in the following episode, that Professor actually said in that conversation?
Yes, I think that's
I recall.
I think that might be where I actually remember hearing the word professor used more recently. So yeah, I think you're right about that. So back to the episode, we get this scene between David and Sid, and talking about what he's going to do. And what's really fun here, and what's really great, is they're talking about future Sid. And you get this really oddly fascinating concept of being jealous of your future self. And she actually goes to the length of making ground rules for his future meeting with, future Sid. I really, both in this episode and even more so in the next episode, I like how they're kind of giving a bit more examination to the relationship between David and Sid, and it's not quite as peachy keen as it seemed to be throughout season one, and even going into this season. But I kind of want to talk about that more when we talk about the next episode, because I think that plays a bigger part there. But future Sid, because before David gets another encounter with her, Farouk shows up there. And that's when we realized, that's what he was up to with the purple goo in the car. He was, coming up with his own method of, zipping to the future to meet future Sid. That was a really interesting scene in a lot of different ways.
It really was. Did you notice? I didn't the first time I watched it, but I did the second time. Did you notice the number of times the frame jerked?
I didn't notice how many times. I know it did. I was aware that it happened, but I didn't make note of how many times.
I didn't count it, but when I first watched it, I remember thinking, it's jerked. When I watched it again, it kept doing it a lot. So much so, to go back to that whole unreliable narrator thing, what's happening here? What plane is it in? What reality is this? I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah. I feel like when David first met future Sid, they were kind of doing that a bit as well. There were things that felt like, I don't know if there were actual mini jump cuts in the frame or not, but I think they did. I feel like they did that. I think to me, my reading of it, I didn't read too much into it other than, it's these characters, it's not like they're physically traveling to the future.
Right.
As we know, because Farouk doesn't have a physical body to begin with, and David's, when he does it, he's in that little, the thing that's like similar to a sensory deprivation tank kind of a thing, and so his consciousness travels. So in a way, it's kind of like opening up, like, the way I viewed it, it's kind of like a transmission, like a radio transmission, a radio waves kind of a thing, and it's like so things like that. It's like interference or static because it's not a perfect connection. So things like that's the way I looked at it. It's just a little artistic flourish. However, when Hawley's involved, it could be something as simple as that, or it could have much deeper meaning. I don't know. But
the world of Hawley,
right? Exactly. But the big thing in this scene is we finally get down to the and Farouk actually just out and out says it himself, because he's talking to future Sid about what's going to supposedly happen in the future. And he talks about the hero becomes the villain and the villain becomes the hero. And I think her counter to that is maybe we're all villains. I thought that's kind of an interesting comment to make, because if you kind of think about it, at one time or another, I feel like almost every character that we followed on the series has done or will do something kind of awful. So to a certain extent, no one is pure on this. Everyone has done something, either in their past or currently or in the future, which is like, that's not very heroic. That's kind of screwed up, or even downright villainous. I don't know if I can think of a character who you can't say that about. I mean, you could say it about certainly David, but you could say it about Sid, and you could say it about Amy, and you could probably, then you can say it about Melanie, if you even remember she's on the show. Ptonomy had that certain attitude about things, especially during the first season. So his motives weren't very. He wasn't the nicest of guys. Clark, of course. Clark was someone who actually was presented as a villain and then became someone that we would ostensibly be rooting for to a certain degree. So I think the show has already been playing with that concept and that idea from the get-go. And Lenny, of course.
Yeah, I think the thing I noticed is, and maybe I'm wrong, but this episode in particular, I found really interesting, because the white background that those sort of PSAs begin with, the stark whiteness, seemed to last longer in this episode. Like, the background seemed to be of a lighter color.
Yep.
Like, it was almost like completely half the episode, and then the colors all went dark the second half, which I think, is just sort of the artistic framing of the whole point of the episode.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Shows like this and other shows that we both mutually watched definitely try to incorporate the use of light and dark and color to really whether it be to accentuate the meaning of scenes, or maybe almost have more of a, what's the phrase? Not subconscious, what's the word I'm looking for?
Subliminal?
Thank you, subliminal. See, I knew there was a reason we had you set here. Kind of almost that subliminal effect as well. So, yeah, I absolutely would agree with that. One of the things I really liked about this episode, because as we had, just like having Farouk and future Sid together, then we get another odd pairing. I love interesting pairings of characters who either have rarely or never had a scene together. We see that in the next episode as well. But in this one, we had that little scene between present-day Sid and Lenny. And I was trying to remember if they had scenes together before. I was like, well, I know when it was evil Lenny and, they encountered each other, although there were other characters there as well, like during the brilliant episode from last season where, the whole takeoff on the silent movie kind of motif, which is still such a great episode of television.
I thought it was interesting because it sort of reminded me of like a flip of Clockworks, and a flip of the beginning of the institution, in that, Sid is almost like the orderly walking up to the mental patient's door, and it's sort of a trip back to the beginning of the series, when they were all in the institution together, and I was really troubled in a great way by the way Aubrey Plaza played that when she talked about being abused and then snapping the fingers at the mirror.
Yeah.
I thought, even in that little scene, she's just been phenomenal in this show. And the way she talks about possibly being abused and then just does, oh, it's no big deal, and walks off. I thought that her work really troubled me and was amazing. But by the same token, Rachel Keller, was complete badass in that scene. and I really liked her. So I just thought that for such a little scene, like, it was really amazing.
Yeah, and of course, getting back to, not knowing what's real or what's true or not, when Lenny is telling these things, there's part of you that thinks, oh, I totally believe that all happened, and then part of you thinks, is she saying these things just to try to play on Sid's potential sympathies? Because that would be a subject matter that would certainly do the trick.
Right.
And with her, I think it's just like what she had done in the episode when she was talking to Clark, whatever. I think it's both. I think it's true, but she's also doing it to be manipulative. I think she's trying to get her way. By the way, just art design comment. Want to make really quick. Whoever, I know, being a lawyer and you've been around jails and prisons, whatever. Maybe this is a thing. I don't know, but having the toilet like directly in front of the sink is really inconvenient. I just noticed that. That's how it's set up. Like it's like the sink and the toilet's like right in front of it. Like, no, what do you get up close to the mirror? When you get the toilet, that made no sense to me.
I will share with you inside information, and that is in a lot of jails, the sink and the toilet are one piece. That the toilet's below and the sink is on top, and it's not very convenient. And usually, it's not a great place. So
just one more reason prison system is inhumane.
Yes.
And one last thing about that scene before I move on, sometimes when a line of dialogue strikes me, I jot it down. And the line that caught my ear from that scene was what Sid says to Lenny when she says, "You're the song they play outside a hostage crisis to keep criminals from thinking clearly."
Yeah, it's a good line.
Such a good line.
I recalled that, and the one I wrote down that jogged my memory that I forgot was early in the episode where Farouk said, "Gods don't follow rules. Gods make rules" to David.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting statement he made, because although he says, "I'm a god and I'm making rules," he still shows restraint throughout that scene and in the way he's conducting things. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, speaking of dovetailing from the thinking clearly line, speaking of not thinking clearly, let's go to Tanami, who wakes up from a Fukuyama and Vermilions-filled nightmare. And in his seemingly altered state of mind, we see him leaving eggs by the nightstands of like Clark, Sid, Carrie. Now, these are eggs that hatch those creepy little oily chicken-like things that we've already seen infest his mind, and finally they're getting to it. And as each one of them later wakes up, finding those little eggshells, I guess they do likewise for all the Division 3 members. I'm guessing Melanie was just too high from all her vaping for them to even bother with or something. But he's not able to leave one for David, because David's back in that time-traveling tank thing, and that's when he gets to go meet with future Sid. Because he's all pissed that she didn't tell him about Amy, and he's switched sides. He doesn't want to help Farouk. Now, future Sid here, is she just really purely being passive-aggressive when she's telling him, that he doesn't have to help, just make good decisions? Or is it really about the fact that she most likely, but by the way, they cut away from that scene earlier in the episode, that she already has a plan B at work. She's already cooked up something with Farouk after all. I was trying to figure that one out myself.
When I watched it the first time, I tended to believe the latter, that it was a plan. When I watched it on the second viewing, I tended to believe that David was so angry and emotional that she believed whatever she said, he might do the opposite. So she sort of played it cool, not in a passive-aggressive way, but in a way to not tip her hand, so that perhaps in emotion he just goes the opposite way.
Right. And also, since actually something I've written down, I realize I've already answered a question by something I said earlier, which, popped into my head. Since David is not physically traveling in time, so he's not actually, quote unquote, actually there. It's not his actual physical being. I'm guessing that is why he's able to touch her in the way that he does without there being any issues. Much like when he and present day Sid go into that little place that he's created in their minds where they can actually, well, have sex. And so, since they can't, and I know that can be a little. I know, and it's one of the things about the show that you have to like just kind of like hold on and just deal with, because it can be confusing at times, because there's part of me that thinks, oh wait, sometimes it's okay, they can't. They're like, no. He made this place for them, so it's almost like a what's that Green Lantern phrase that they always say? I can't think of the phrase. Anyway, it doesn't matter. What they said about the final season of Lost, I just can't think of what you call it when you create the illusion.
In my mind,
constructs. That's what.
Yes, I was going to say Mind Palace. It was like Sherlock Holmes' Mind Palace, but
and you know what? If one really wants to really bore themselves silly, they can probably dig through our podcast from last season that me and Dan did. And I'm pretty positive I used the phrase "Mind Palace" that we talked, and I remember referencing Sherlock because it made me think of that at the time. I just forgot, so thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Can't spell brain without Brian. Anyway, so back at Division 3, then we get the episode kind of starts to follow a very much more straightforward pattern at this point. Clark, Carey, and Autonomy and Sid, they're on this whole dark chicken fueled mission to kill Admiral Fukuyama and his Vermilions. And Autonomy and Carey, they take on dozens of regenerating Vermilion androids in the corridors, while Sid and Clark confront Fukuyama, who takes off his mask, or his basket, I should say, to reveal, well, a guy who very much looks like his name would be Admiral Fukuyama.
Well said.
Yeah, well, I gotta admit, I was probably a mite disappointed by that reveal. It kind of reminded me when I was a kid, and we finally saw what Darth Vader looked like under the mask. I was like, really? That's it? All right.
Particularly in light of I believe the sort of the nightmare that Autonomy had,
right?
Where sort of the weird face opened on the basket,
right? And I'm still. I mean, I guess actually a question I've had about Fukuyama kind of sort of gets answered to a certain degree in the next episode about when we get the interior view of the basket and we seem to be flashing from room to room and whatnot. How that really is what he sees, and they're like, oh, they've made a point of saying he sees everything. Yes, I guess he really does.
Right.
But whereas we see, basically an older Asian fellow, Japanese Fukuyama, Sid and Clark see something quite different. They see, I would call it a larger version of those little things that are inside, well, pretty much all of their heads at this point. And it's just as Clark is about to blow Fukuyama away, that's when David shows up to stop him and then reveal to each of them that they've been infested with those creepy little chickeny things, which he simply refers to as insanity. Before he crushes them under his heel. I like the fact that he just calls them insanity, because it takes us back to what you were saying about the one John Hamm PSA that actually did play a part in any of this, and you were saying that was about delusion, because I couldn't remember. Was the first one about madness and the second one about delusion? Is that how they did it?
I may have conflated those, but it was one of those. And as I watched this and thought back on it, I think I hung on the word delusion because we had the moral panic, the group think, and I thought this was almost like the dispelling of a group delusion,
right?
That they'd all had.
Right. So then we get this rather, for me at least, an unexpectedly horrific moment where whatever this creature actually is, it basically hatches out of the now black goo drooling Tanami, which kind of sort of kills him, but not quite, as we later find out. But that was a bit more than I was expecting. I did not see that one coming. Although I guess since Tanami, as we discover later, Tanami's mind or consciousness is now in the mainframe of thing. I guess he's sort of kind of still alive to some degree, and maybe they can find him another body. I don't know.
So I'm sure someone has a brother that we could put him in at some point.
And of course, you meant brother as far as sibling that you weren't going.
Yes.
Not another. No, just go get another brother.
No, I did not mean that.
That's how. That's how I meant it. I don't care. So anyway, that giant creature thing, it basically skitters away, and David runs into Carrie. I found it interesting. He runs into Carrie, but in the corridor, but he doesn't stop to pluck the thing out of her head.
Right
now. I don't know if the idea is once that thing is out on the loose that those things no longer function or they're expelled on their own. Because otherwise, hey, no one ever took that thing out of Carrie's head. she should technically still have that little creepy thing inside her noggin, but I don't think they never say it. So I was like, I don't know what's happening here.
Well, an interesting question would be if Carrie and Carrie were integrated and one crawled in, what would happen when they unintegrated and split apart?
That's interesting. I don't know. So if it was put in while she was sleeping, the assumption is he was in her body that they were one at the same time. I'm guessing.
That was my guess, but it did make me think if they were together and it went in, would it control both of their minds regardless of when they split apart again?
I'm gonna go with no, although it's probably yes. because when my assumption again, they haven't. One of the disappointing things about the season is how it looked like they were going to really play up and really build on the Carrie situation, and they've kind of let it fall by the wayside for several episodes now.
Right.
Which is unfortunate because there's still a lot you can do there, but whatever. We need more John Hamm stuff. Anyway, because I'm assuming it would only affect the actual physical host, but once he's inside her, he no longer has a physical being. He only becomes a physical being once he's exited her body. But I don't know. This is one of those shows you kind of have to make up the rules as you're going along. I mean, even the way he takes the things out of their heads, is almost more surreal than possibly realistic. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just it comes out of their heads as opposed to with no holes, no orifices, no anything. No.
Right. No mark. It just comes out, pops out.
Oh, and this actually, the next thing actually goes to what you were saying about the use of color and the backgrounds, how they were predominantly the white backgrounds earlier in the episode. Because later in as we're getting near the end of the episode, when David is taking on that creature, or insanity, if we want to call it that, he eventually actually takes, so to speak, the thing to another place, another plane, whatever. And this one's red.
Yeah.
So oh, red. That's interesting. And they've played with the color red on this show certainly before. Although he has a nice little meta moment here where he says, "You picked a really shitty time to attack us. I'm already dealing with a lot here." But obviously he then, I guess he shrinks it down to jar size and then, kills. And then as the episode finishes up, we do get back to Tanami again. Like I had mentioned, he ends up in the mainframe. The Vermilions take him there. It's something which is apparently organic and which I guess therefore that's what's been represented by those images we keep seeing of the trees that we keep seeing whenever we see Fukuyama in the Vermilions as like a background image, which always makes you think they just keep using like really giant screensavers in the room that they're hanging out in because it looks like something I'd like see on like Microsoft or something. But we see by the episodes that autonomy or his consciousness is somewhere else. It's the digital mainframe where you see ones and zeros are projected everywhere. And this little old lady, who I kept thinking, wow, she's like Mother Abigail from The Stand or something, kind of shushes him, even though he's kind of speechless at that point anyway. And yeah, and interesting, actually to end an episode on with autonomy as opposed to, a more traditional David or one of the, more leading characters.
Yeah, it was an interesting finish because now you call in question what's autonomy going to be able to do going forward from here. Right,
which then we get to find out in the next chapter, which would be chapter 16, which we're going to talk about now. I gotta tell you, this one I'm still not sure about. You might have more insight on this than I do, since I think you've watched it twice. I've only had one viewing under my belt on it. I don't even know if I'm gonna be able to make my mind about the episode as a whole until I've seen the next episode. Anyway, I don't know. Putting aside the always wondrous visuals that this show is known for, and then you get the fun with split screens that, once again, we've seen Noah Hawley approve of for both this series and Fargo. We've gone down this road a few times before. Really getting to once again, what I call the meat of the episode. You've got some stuff I thought was really great, and you got some stuff debatable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thought that it's interesting you say that because I was looking at my notes, and my last note, even after watching it the second time, said, I'm not sure how I feel about this. So I think I'm sort of where you are. It was an interesting episode, but I'm not quite sure where I've landed on it yet.
Yeah, and part of my issues with this episode, which I'm going to talk about some of the good stuff first, is to a certain extent also indicative of the season as a whole. And again, I'm just to preface everything, I'm still liking the show a lot, and I enjoy. I make sure to watch it. I enjoy it. I like talking about it, etc. But it's not quite the standard that season 1 was at this point, and I can't dismiss that. I'm not saying it's having a sophomore slump necessarily, but there are issues here that season 1 did not, generally speaking, did not have. We'll get to them. Let's get to them.
I agree with that. I was just going to add, my sort of feeling is that last season was obviously knocked out of the park. Mm-hmm. There are episodes of this season that are A's and there are some B pluses. I mean, it's not all A's.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I've seen there certainly has not been a quote-unquote bad episode. I'm just worried about the season as a whole and how long certain things are taking and so on. But one thing that's kind of interesting to me about this show, that this is a show that, the critics have at times may have said that it always kind of suffered from a certain lack of character development, or really lacked a certain emotional core at times. And I thought what they did best in this episode were the scenes that really focused on those things. And I'm really talking about the scenes with Sid. I mean, like from our opening scene with David, when they essentially have an argument about whether David had an argument with future Sid.
Right.
I just think it's a really good scene, because even with the usual Legion plot weirdness, which is, on the surface, as opposed to the root of the disagreement, what really makes it work is that, and I started to say this earlier, and I realized, no, say that for the next episode, is in this scene, as well as when Sid catches up with David later on in La Désolée, it makes them feel like a real couple. and it's not the more idealized or somewhat sketchily drawn beyond, hip dialogue and longing looks that we usually have between the two of them. I mean, I love Sid to death, and I really like David, and I love them together. But this is where I'm feeling they feel more like a true couple to me than I've felt about them before, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the interesting thing about that dynamic, and because we've talked on message boards, that you and I both are in Team Sid. We love Sid. But it was interesting that in this relationship and when they're together, as I watched it, I'm on Sid's side. I'm like, David, why are you hiding things? David, why are you being insecure? Clearly she's on your side. And I thought that felt very real, which led into, I found the discussion between Sid and Clark about David very interesting.
I would go even further and say I think the scene between Sid and Clark is the best scene in the episode.
Totally agree.
I think that's definitely the best scene in the episode. I mean, and talking about that scene as well as all the other scenes, Sid. I mean, again, love the character, love the actress. And I love when they give her really strong stuff to work with, which they do sometimes, like the Sid backstory episode. They certainly did, I thought, and I thought they really did her justice in this episode. But good lord, the scene with her and Clark, and what I love about this scene. Unlike a lot of Legion stuff, this is purely about character, dialogue, and just really fine performances. And the bonus there is not only, do we get, the whole thing about Sid truly questioning her relationship, because she knows that it's not what it used to be, which in a way she in herself is actually saying what I was just talking about. She was implying that their somewhat romanticized meeting in the hospital was almost more fairy tale fantasy, and now the reality of them, which is funny to show, which is hardly reality at all, is now decidedly less so. But it's interesting that she says something along those lines when reality, again, that's the core of any issue with David as far as what... But, because she even says herself, he still has problems determining what is real and what is not. Much like us watching. We don't know what is real and what is not.
Yeah, it was a very meta statement about everything, but had a real emotional core that she bounced off Clark. And what the interesting thing I found was it was kind of funny that Clark sort of gave her advice, based on his past, and and having her say, look, I get all that, but you really need to look at this because your boyfriend can get mad and destroy the world.
Oh, and I love because no pun from the previous episode intended. That you can see he's trying to be careful. There is a certain walking on eggshells, kind of thing going on here, but he has to come out and say, it's like, yeah, if you hurt his feelings, he could be like, bye world. But I love that they also gave Clark some nice little moments here because he's really, Linklater is really great here. Him talking about how the man he loved would jump out of airplanes to get away from him, and then you get the little comic tragedy of how one day the guy's chute didn't open or something.
Right, which I love because then Sid parachuted to David.
Yes,
in La Desolée.
And no coincidence there, I'm sure. And her chute certainly did open. If I was going to watch the episode again, and I might, just because I probably will, that's probably a scene I'm gonna look forward to watching again because it's just nice. I just really liked it. That one made me smile. Okay, what else was in that episode? Oh, we do spend a significant amount of time with Tanami in the mainframe, so he actually gets a decent amount of screen time here, which is kind of like it's nature on the outside and techno on the inside, and that's when we actually get a peek at Fukuyama's origins, how he was basically picked because he could potentially be a storehouse of secrets that would be impenetrable to any telepath, which is essentially why, I guess Farouk, etc., are trying to get to him or get rid of him because, he's the one wall that they can't break through, unlike everybody else.
Did I miss the importance of the fact that I believe he said he was 17 when they did the operation to change him? It was 17, the manifestation of when David started really having problems. Was there an importance to that, or am I just attributing that to a random fact thrown out there? Because it seemed weird for them to say, "How old are you?" I would think people wouldn't care how old the person was if they were the right person to do that and have those abilities.
Right.
But they made the point of saying, how old are you? And I think he said 17, if I remember correctly.
Well, I don't recall if they ever made a point of saying when David's powers manifest. Although I thought they had manifest at a younger age. That's why they had him on drugs to try to temper that. I thought that had happened earlier, but I'm not really sure. For all I know, they could just be fans of a lot of great, classic rock and roll songs. And like, right. Hey, it's, sexy at 17, or she was just 17. You know what I mean? Anyway.
Well, the alternative thought, and that is, to bring in my criminal law brain, is to say, hey, here's somebody who's just not quite old enough, so that the indignity being done to him is a little worse.
Right, yeah. Okay, that would make sense. I like that. But other than learning about the origins of Fukuyama, which only gives us more reason to believe Fukuyama is going to play a much bigger part as this show goes on, Tanami also finds the monk, who, just like Tommy, is dead in the real world, but his consciousness or whatever, or his mind or whatever, they're in the mainframe, except he's all hooked up to the wires, much like we saw happening to him to a certain degree before he died, I think, in that episode. That was one of the things in the I think I almost glossed over that when we discussed that episode several weeks ago, because I was like, I'm not even sure what's going on here. I'm just I'm just gonna skip right by. Like, no. Say, hey, you didn't talk about the monk, up on the ceiling dealing. Like, no, I didn't know what to say about him. Like, I don't know. Sometimes you just gotta you don't gotta mention every detail. I'm gonna leave that one out.
Right.
But here, there is a very important reason for the monk to be there, because that's how Tommy finds out the location of Farouk's body, which he relays to David by using one of the Vermilions as his puppet. Kind of literally. He's talking through her, so that's what you do with a puppet. So I like that at least Tanami is playing some significant role here, because he seems to that not be the case with him usually. There are a bunch of other things to talk about in the episode, but I kind of feel like that's kind of my linchpin to start skewing a little bit more negative, or at least a little meh. Doesn't mean there aren't things that were really fun to look at or even fun to watch, but I kind of have, this is where the problems of the season are bothering me a little bit. I'll do the character one. It has become increasingly frustrating how certain characters are barely/rarely being used, and it just seems like a waste. I mentioned before the Loudermilks, Carrie and Carrie, who've kind of initially we thought, oh, they're going to really do something with them, because it's a fascinating situation and there's so much you can get into, and that seems to have more been relegated to a couple minutes in one episode about a month ago, and they've never bothered with it since. And then there's Melanie. And I know from the ads Melanie is going to play a significant part in the next episode, but that's a little too late, especially considering it appears that she's going to be under the influence or whatever of Farouk or Oliver or whatever the hell they're doing with her. I'm kind of annoyed about that.
I'm totally annoyed by it, and the thing that annoyed me was we have this great character they benched, and the first thing she does is to be controlled by her lover, who's really not her lover, but Farouk.
Yeah.
And I found that very unfortunate, and it both for the misuse of the actor, but also in light, I mean, good Lord, in light of everything that's gone on in current events and stuff, to say, oh, the first significant thing this female character is going to do is to be used to do mayhem by a man by controlling her mind. I just thought it was a terrible choice.
The only defense of it, and I'm not going to defend it, is when we had that episode a few weeks ago, where a few characters were trapped in their own little mind prison, and her situation was she wanted to be in control.
Right.
That was her big thing. That she just wanted to finally just totally be in control of just everything, life, etc. So having this happen to her, that's the worst possible thing that could happen to her.
And I get that defense, but it would have been nice for them to use her.
Oh, I agree. I don't even want to call it a defense. It's more like, I get what you're doing, but... And again, if that character had been used to a much greater and significant degree throughout the season, this decision, putting aside what's going on with Me Too and whatnot, would not bother me half as much.
Right.
Because then that could be said of any character, who's been under control. But it's the fact that she's been barely used at all, and then when she finally gets used, that's what you're going to use her for. That pisses me off. Yeah,
and not to mention that if they had used her and brought her sort of out of, her hookah funk, where she just wanted to lay around and mope. If they had brought her out of that, it would make what happened that much more emotionally resonant and impactful too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't mind establishing at the beginning or early on in the very first episode of the season that that's what she's been going through. I mean, it's a little strange decision, but okay. But have her come out of it then and there. Now, yeah, she did have some... It's not like she hasn't had any scenes, but they've been few and far between. And we see that she's still kind of that way. This is a character where I just feel should have been more energized, more motivated, just played a much more significant part in everything. She was, before they merged with Division 3, she was the person in charge, and now we hardly see her. It's bothered. Like, for example, like if you said to me right now, like, hey, you know how back in season 1, excuse me, when we met all these different, basically mutant characters, and she was the one in charge. It's like, if you said, hey, what was her ability? I'd be like, did she have one? I don't even remember, because I actually don't remember. I don't think she did. Did she?
I don't recall one, but the thing I think that you're touching on that bothers me is when Oliver was taken from her and trapped in underwater world, with the diver suit and all that. She didn't fall apart without him then. And you would think, with a chance to go after him after the sadness of what occurred at the end of season 1, that she would have snapped out of it and been, based on her character in season 1, been motivated to go after them and help David and try to get him back. And I think, far be it for me to criticize Noah Hawley and the writers. They're wonderful, but I just really think that they weren't true to her character, weren't true to her strengths, and really just sort of marginalized her by not giving her enough weight to where when things have happened, it didn't really resonate the way I felt like it should have based on what we've seen out of her character.
Right. I mean, I would have found it somewhat more acceptable if they had it so that when Farouk took over Oliver, he basically killed Oliver and took over. That's not the implication. The implication is that the Oliver situation is much like he's inside him, kind of like what he was doing to David. He just found a new host. So it's not like the Lenny situation. As far as I know at least, Oliver's not dead. You know, I mean, if they were saying, "Oh no, he's actually dead," then I would get her being, it's like she finally, after all these years of hoping he would return, and he finally comes back briefly, and then he's dead, as opposed to he's finally back briefly, and then he's taken away again. Then, oh my God, fight for him, do whatever you can. Just bug me.
Right. And I remember, one of the best scenes was when Oliver and her were reunited, and I think she was making coffee in like the cafeteria before the raid, and they just were a good couple, and they built that in a way that then they really sort of betrayed, I felt like, with her this season.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been keeping track number wise. They've got several more episodes for the season. They added an extra one, which is interesting. So one can say they've got time to try to make up for it, but it's kind of reminding me of like when I was criticizing the season 3 of Fargo and how wrong things seemed to be going in the first half of that season, and they kind of made up for it to a certain degree in the second half of that season. I'm not looking at Legion the same way. I'm liking it probably more than at this point than say this point in season 3 of Fargo, maybe. But it's just frustrating because it's like it's Jean Smart. She's so good.
And she worked with Noah Hawley in Fargo.
Yeah, so. Season 2 of Fargo, she's amazing. She's fantastic great in that. And we, just again, it's letting these characters kind of fall by the wayside or being barely used. And I'm not going to blame it simply on they're taking up time with like the John Hamm things. That's true to a certain degree, but there's still plenty of other ways you could have incorporated these characters into the storyline or used them more, which takes me to one of my other major issues right now. Okay, now I don't have it in front of me. I could look it up. I don't feel like it. We're several episodes into the season right now, right? This was chapter 16, and they started with chapter 9. I think started the season because I think the first season was 8 episodes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Okay, so I'm not much of a mathematician, so let me go 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. All right, it's 8 episodes. 8 episodes, and we're still wandering around looking for the body. And that the split screen thing of both David and Sid, as well as Farouk and Oliver and presumably unnamed person pulling them on a rickshaw, because didn't look like it was anyone specific. On one hand, I kind of like the visual. It's nice. And I like them, really hammering home the fact that, these are these different couplings, and how Sid and, David are in it together or whatever. But it seemed to go on for a really long time. And it reminded me, it's kind of like the storyline overall, like, this search for the body has been going on for a really long time now. It seems that it's almost like a pacing issue with the show. And I'm the last one to complain about the shows being slow. And I'm not sure if that's exactly the right word here, because a lot of shows, a lot of shows we both are fans of have been accused of that at certain times. Doesn't matter what it could be. The Americans, could be Mad Men, whatever. But I'm like, you're hanging the show on this very delicate thread of a plot of race to a body, and you're padding it up with all this other stuff. And part of me wants to say, go back to the first. He's like, they did so much more in a certain number of episodes than they've done in this season. And if this wasn't, for example, if this was indeed the 8th episode of the season, and I think I have that right, if I'm adding 7th or 8th, that's how long the first season was. Think about everything that happened in that season. Think about how much has happened in this season. That bothers.
No, I totally agree, and I liked the way it looked when that showed him look, as you said, but I almost felt like somehow this devolved into like a Cannonball Run type thing, like let's race to the body, which in one instance is fine, but in another instance, when you've already established you have these two super powerful people, once they know where the body is, you would think that that would not be a prolonged track to get there.
Right, and they have to come up with another device like, oh, but well, it's in the church or whatever. But the church is moving, and like, oh, which is, you know what? I love the idea of it, but you didn't really show that to me. So that kind of, it's like, then you're just telling me that. I'm not having that awareness that because that would have been kind of an interesting, surreal, beyond Dark Tower kind of an concept, and they didn't really give it to us. I mean, then again, I could be a real pain in the ass. So let me get this straight. David has the ability to poof appear here, but then he has to keep walking.
Right. That's sort of or David can immediately project to a specific point in the future to find Sid, but he can't project to a body when someone tells him where it is.
Yeah, it's because especially because someone like David and Farouk also, but really David has abilities that seem to be kind of unlimited. It seems like he can pretty much do anything. He really is godlike in that sense, as Farouk referred to him. But he can't do this.
Right. Now, I will say the one thing I did think was interesting, and maybe they did it for this, is there was a little bit more of the question of he and Sid and their future raised.
Yes.
In this. And I thought that was interesting, but I think that could have been done fairly early on and avoided some of the length of what I call the cannonball run part of this episode.
Right. Now, I'll switch. There were things I did still like that we haven't mentioned yet. I loved the weird little David plotting out the strategy of what he's doing.
Oh, that was great. Loved it.
And when you realize, when it seems like, okay, David's got a plan. This isn't simply, I'm just going to get a body. I mean, how he gives him, each of the different characters like a little psychic suggestion about if or when they may show up. Again, it's very hard to figure out on the show what's literally happening and what's happening in a different plane. I don't even know anymore sometimes. It's like, I just go with it. Maybe I should drink while I watch the show. I don't know. But I really enjoyed that. I thought that was something that was different. But the thing is, when I talk about the show, I want to make sure that I can fawn over the interesting visuals all the live long day. But I want the stuff that really drives me is just some like really great moments, scenes, plot lines, characters, whatever. Which I thought we did get a lot in season 1. And we've gotten some in season 2. I mean, I actually like some of the stuff that maybe some say might have derailed the pacing of the show, like the Sid backstory episode. I really enjoyed that one a lot, and I like the multiple David episode, even though one can say you plopped that one in the middle of the season and it resulted in no forward progression for the story. But I enjoyed it, so I was all right with it. But the show's chief issue is always going to be being careful, or not, they're not careful about it. They often style will triumph over substance on the show because it's such the art direction and everything else about it is so imaginative, it's so different than anything we're used to seeing on television. But you gotta be able to back that up with just a little bit more, and I think they've kind of not done that as much as they could have this season so far.
And I think to contrast with last season, what the point you're making that I sort of thought too watching this episode is this show doesn't always just totally crackle with action, but when it does, it tends to move fairly quickly. Like, think of the raid, when the raid happened, and just how quickly all of a sudden they were out of there and they had to find a new place, and that place was gone.
Right.
That they didn't drag that out. Like, this is a show, when it goes down a side passage, you accept that, and it may get weird and it may take some time. But usually when there's, forward action, it's dealt with fairly quickly in this show.
Yeah.
And the forward action, whenever there's been action, hasn't seemed to move the story along.
Right. It's just been, and basically it's been, hey, bad guys are going to show up at Division 3 and screw things up again. That's been a running thing this season. It's happened like 3 times, or maybe not even necessarily bad guys, but someone. It's happened at least 3 times so far this season.
It's the Star Labs effect. Anybody can get in and over again destroy attack
right.
you in your safe space.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the thing I find strange, and this might be one of my final points on it, unless there's more you like to say, which is cool. Here's a weird thing I'm finding right now. The stakes of this season are technically huge, because they keep talking about the potential end of the world, of what will happen in the future, etc. And that's where all this is supposed to be leading. And the stakes of the first season were really more about, there was the world element, of course, but it was more about David and really like trying to save him and from what's been going on in his life, with Farouk being this parasite inside him, etc. So in a way, I think the stakes were quote unquote smaller in season 1 than they were in season 2, but they seem to have more of an impact and mean more in season 1 than they have so far this season. Like I'm vaguely aware of what may or may not go wrong in season 2, where I was keenly aware of it in season 1, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'll save this because it sort of leads into my thoughts about the final John Hamm PSA that surprised us.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have similar thoughts on that.
You know what? Well, why don't you talk about it right now? Because that was the little... We were already like 49 minutes, I think, into the episode, or something like that, if I noticed on my counter. And all of a sudden, we got an act that was just totally one of those John Hamm PSA spots, which, as we were saying earlier, we thought they might have been over and done with, and all of a sudden they threw another one at us. And this time I was personally, again, like him, like the visuals, whatever, I was kind of annoyed. I was genuinely annoyed about it.
I didn't love it, and I thought a lot about what it meant. It wasn't as on the nose as some of those in the past have been, but I think it went too hard trying to tie, a contemporary problem of obvious technology to the episode. And the meaning I took from it, and feel free to disagree, is the only thing I really felt that connected it to this episode in any meaningful way was to say that maybe all these people possess powers, that those powers and the use of those powers have been their focus, and they haven't paid attention to the truths in front of them and the people around them, and the value of the people around them. And that's a very sort of generic tie-in, but I just, when I watched it, like if they'd have cut that out, I wouldn't have missed it at all.
First of all, the whole thing had a very kind of like Black Mirror light feel to it. It's like this, and which is ironic since John Hamm actually was in a Black Mirror episode, which kind of dealt a little bit with, or more than a little, with like this, the people's obsession with social media and stuff, which they play onto here. As far as your possible interpretation, that's not bad. That makes sense. I think the way I took it, which might make even less sense, it's more about people focusing and whatever on just what's right in front of them, and what impacts only them and them only, and not. It's almost like not being able to see the forest for the trees, so to speak. You're not looking at how how life is impacting others and what's going on around you. So like David, although has been warned and told of what potentially is going to happen in the future, which could be like the end of the world, is still kind of just focused on his revenge motif as far as Farouk is concerned. And even when he in the end of the world thing is brought up, he said, "I'll deal with that later. We'll worry about that later." And it's like, dude, that's kind of huge. You're just going to worry about that later. By the way, they still have not mentioned anything about her goddamn arm. Anyway, just had to say that.
I was going to ask if you thought we'll find that out before the end of the season.
Good Lord, how long did it take us to explain the polar bears on Lost? I don't know. I kind of think they will. Which means they will. Which means they won't. You know what they should have done? Because like her one arm, the one arm is just comes down to like a little nub. It would be kind of funny if they just had like a fingerless glove just covering the because technically it's still flesh and skin that could anyway. I don't know if they've designed those yet. No, I'll ask Jim. Let's get old retired baseball pitcher Jim Abbott on the phone. only the handful of baseball fans will get that reference. Everyone else will be like, I'm not googling that. I don't care, Scott. Move on. All right. I don't know if there's really anything else that really stands out about the episode, at least at this moment. Is there anything else that occurs to you, or?
No, I really thought this episode would end like at the body.
Yeah.
And I was disappointed that, like, in my head, I thought, will this end next episode? And I hope it does.
It better.
Right.
Because I don't actually want an entire season of that. And the fact that they're running after it or pursuing it in the desert right now makes me think, all right, they got to be getting to it.
I thought like the last scene would be like both of them arriving at the body, and that would be where it would end. And I was kind of shocked that it didn't end there.
Yeah, well, whatever. I think I've just reached my spent on Legion.
I got you.
So now. Do you want to talk about something else for a few minutes? Do you feel up for it or not?
Absolutely. All
right. So, as a special treat for folks, and I will make it clear in posts, whatever, that so folks who don't listen to Legion can just zip to this in the chapters. I got Brian here, and we are both fans of a certain other show on FX, which is about to, as I said earlier in the podcast, like an hour and a half ago, is about to reach its conclusion next week. So, I'm very aware of the time. We're not going to spend too long. I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. Watch, it'll be 2 hours. But right now, we are going to spend a little time talking about The Americans. Okay, so I think I talked about The Americans once upon a time on one of our podcasts years ago. I don't remember. I think I did. Yeah, I know I talked about it when we do our best ofs, because The Americans has often been one of my shows that I've picked. I think one season I actually think I might have picked it as the best of the season, of the year, if I'm not mistaken. Season 4, which was so good. So, Brian, you like me, we've watched The Americans from the get-go, correct?
Yes.
And Dan's actually finally now gone back, and he's been binging it. Last I checked, he was about 35 episodes in after the last couple weeks, which goes to show you that even a guy who is as busier than most anyone else I know, with multiple jobs and working 10, 12-hour shifts and raising kids and everything else, still finds time to somehow watch already 35 episodes of a TV show. So for all the naysayers, like, I can't catch him, hey, if Dan can do it, and he's got more shit going on than most people I know, anyone should be able to do it. But what have you been thinking about this season so far?
I love this show, and this season, I know I've heard other people say it, and you may have said it in the past, but this is every so often there's a show that's just not as popular as you think it should be, doesn't receive the recognition you think it should, and Matthew Rhys and Kerry Russell, the cast, everything, the story, the tension. I mean, I've absolutely loved it, and obviously a lot's riding on the finale for how we feel, because that's how we viewers now treat shows.
Right.
But I have loved it, and it is, especially in the last 3 to 4 weeks. I try to catch it within at least 24 hours of airing, so I'm not spoiled, so I know what's happening. And I think the way that Matthew Rhys, that Philip and Elizabeth have diverged and now are working their way maybe back together, I think has just been amazing acting, amazing writing. I just love it. And I at my age, I was a kid in the 80s, so I think that's one of the reasons I've loved it, is seeing it as an adult and thinking about it, when I was a teenager. And so maybe that gives away my age, but I find myself now, with a week to go, being much more sad that it will be gone than I thought I would have.
Yeah. I'm kind of right there with you. I've been a fan of the show since its onset, and I've been enjoying the fact that at certain points during its run, you could see it getting better, and the characters filling out more, and really, and as a result, I end up having more of an emotional investment in the show, which is one of those things that's just so important for any really for any show that wants to regard itself as a high quality TV show. I don't care how literary you are. I don't care how great it looks. I don't care all those kind of things. I also need to have a serious emotional investment, and for a large extent, Matthew Rhys's character Philip has kind of been that character, but I really love what they've done with Elizabeth Jennings this season, because she was always the one that whenever you talk to people who are fans of the show, it was always kind of they always reduce it like, oh, Philip's the one with the heart, and she's kind of more the cold, calculating one of the two, and and then thus people might not like her as much or whatever. And I always thought, I think you're kind of missing the point of their experiences and how how the life has affected them. I think this season has been Kerry Russell's crowning achievement season. I will guarantee she's going to get an Emmy nomination. I really hope she pulls off a win. I don't know who else might be in the running this year, because she really deserves it. She is just really, especially in the last couple episodes, we're used to seeing the conflicted nature with Philip. We've rarely seen the conflicted nature with her. I mean, one can go back in time to a couple key episodes where you did see some of that. You can go all the way back to season 3 in the "Do Male Robots Dream of Electric Sheep" episode, where she's with that old woman in the warehouse factory, whatever, that makes the male robots, whatever. And you could see maybe there was a certain amount that she was emotionally affected. But this season, I think, has just been a tour de force for her. And the storyline, I felt for a while that once they were going to get to the final season, I thought at least the show had to come down to putting Philip and Elizabeth in opposition to each other. And I think that's been kind of something that we've seen on very different types of shows, but that kind of has to be the case. And I can point to any number of examples. Would there be characters that were always in opposition? Like, say, the final season of Justified. You had to build to Raylan and Boyd, the two going at each other. Or The Shield, where it's Vic and Shane going at each other. Or you can even go like Breaking Bad. It's not till the final season where it's really, to a certain extent, not about Walt. People think it's Walt versus Hank. No, it's Walt versus Jesse.
Right.
So you knew it kind of had. This is where it had to go because they took special care to show, although they had these shared experiences, how they were different. And in the 5th season, which I know for many, including me, felt like a bit of a slower step down from the really spectacular season 4, because I think season 4 is the best season of the show, quite frankly. I think season 5 was really more about examining the relationship and marriage and thus preparing us for how these two were going to, if not literally separate as far as like breaking up the marriage, how they were going to... the fact that when we start season 6 that he's no longer been working... pretty much not been working as a spy for them anymore, except when they need him to go get the tapes from the girl and whatever. That's not a surprise. I was not surprised by it. I kind of like, that makes perfect sense to me. Like she would continue in the job and he wouldn't. I felt that's where they were going to have to go.
Yeah, the thing I have loved about this season is a lot of times in the last season, things that weren't developed, they don't waste time to develop in the last season. But the things I have loved is like this season, they actually developed Henry and Philip and gave the idea that Henry is this successful student and wants to stay at school where he's really thriving. And that's a real cause of conflict for Philip.
Right.
And so they develop Henry as a character, but it feeds into Philip, who we care about, and you see, how that affects him and how that's playing into this overall thing. Because, the more Philip supports that, the further he gets away from, some of his ideals and background. And I've loved that. And the big question, one of the big questions is if this all goes to hell, what happens to Henry?
I have no idea. It's a great question. Because the theories I had for the show just 3 or 4 weeks ago, I feel I've already kind of tossed out the window. Because, and I should have known better. I truly should have known better. Because I fell into the same trap that people, including me, have done for so many shows over the last, say, 15 years. Where when you're getting to that final episode, you invariably start talking about one or more character deaths. Like if a storyline, especially if a show is done with rather serious, dark material, either be good and evil, criminals, whatever, you figure, someone's going to have to die. Will the main character or someone connected to the main character die? We said it about everything from The Sopranos to The Shield to Breaking Bad and so on and so forth. I fell into that trap with The Americans. And I was so sure that, one of those two is going to have to die. And I thought it was, and I came up with all these, we all did. We came up with different theories of how it could go down. And it doesn't mean it might not still happen, but the way they've played this last episode and a half or so, I'm now I'm definitely backing off my original theory of how it was going to go down. It's still possible someone could die, but I hate the fact that I'm even reducing it to that. Because it's not just... even though that could be what happens. I'm just so floored by... not floored yet. I expect to be floored, I should say. I can't wait for the scene between Stan and, I'm assuming, Philip when he knows, when he actually knows for a fact, and they have to, because they're gonna have to have that scene. That's the scene. That's the scene we've been waiting for since season 1. And when he knows, what does he do? You know, and will they? And they're kind of guiding the storyline. I don't know if they're going to do this. They're kind of almost giving them an out, so to speak, and which they brought up in this last episode with Oleg's character. How if they're working kind of to help prevent the overthrow of Gorbachev and the coup or even everything else, and and preventing the assassination of the negotiator. In a way, they're kind of working for the same purpose,
Right.
And it's it was a fascinating moment in this last episode when Philip is talking to Oleg, and Philip's initial opinion is how he doesn't give a damn about Gorbachev. That's not his problem. And when Oleg speaks more about it, you realize, maybe you need to rethink that.
Yeah,
because you finally have someone at this point in history in charge of the Soviet Union who actually seems to genuinely not just want peace, but actually come to any number of agreements with America, and maybe, as we know, help tear down that wall and so on and so forth. I was very. Go on.
I was just going to say, and to further speak of how much I think of this show is in ticking off those boxes of things that are fan service, but also well done. I mean, the scene with Oleg and Stan, and that moment where Oleg totally tells Stan, like, you don't understand, my parents, my kid, my wife, all still live there. I can't betray that. And you see Stan cares about Oleg, even though he's still back and doing this, and that paid off that relationship in a way that I think a lot of shows wouldn't have paid that off in that way.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really well done that maybe Stan in that moment, he may not agree, but he gets it.
Right. Stan sounds a really interesting character, and I know that I remember I was on Facebook some weeks ago, and someone was, I don't know if they were seriously grousing or not, but how all of a sudden now Stan's on their trail, and so it's like, well, it's not that much of a stretch, I don't think. I mean, could they have had something like that happen an episode or two earlier? I guess, but using the Breaking Bad analogy, and I've talked about this online as well. It's kind of vaguely reminiscent of Hank finally catching on to Walt being being Heisenberg and being the big drug kingpin. And if you actually look at the number of episodes from the point where Hank first figures it out, and you got to remember, Hank figuring out it happens in an instant when he's sitting on the toilet and he sees the book, the Walt Whitman book thing, whatever. And then it plays out over the course of the second half of the season. But if you talk about sheer number of episodes, it only takes place over, I want to say 6 episodes. And then Ozymandias with Hank being killed early on in that. There isn't, so my only point of that is there isn't actually that much a different amount of time between the Walt Hank situation and what we now have, the Stan and the Jennings situation. It's maybe a difference of 1, maybe 2 episodes. That's not that big a deal. Because
I was going to say, okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, and also bearing in mind, it's suspicions that are fueled by a memory from years ago. And it almost made me want to go back and watch season 1 because I'd almost forgotten about that. And it's like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember thinking back then when Americans were first on, is this going to be a running thing where he's always suspicious of him? That's going to get stupid pretty quick. He lives across the street from them. But I like that they kind of dealt with it and then dismissed it, So then that's why you have a scene when he's talking to the guy who used to be his partner and now is in charge of the other force, and when he actually says out loud his suspicions, what it does sound like that's all you got. That's what you're
Right.
basing it on. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that it made me think of, because I've thought a lot about the Hank Walter White connection to this, is, Hank and Walter's relationship was a lot more superficial and out of obligation.
Yeah.
Hank and Philip were really equals, or Stan and Philip were really equals, and there's something about that, and you see this all the time in my profession. I see people that live with people for years that suddenly, there's a crime alleged or something occurs, and we live with people all the time that suddenly something comes out and it's like, I would have never known that about that person. So it's kind of crazy to import our sense of justice or honor on someone else and say, oh, hey, this guy was like your best friend across the street for 5 years. Why didn't you see this? Well, he knew a side of him in a way that even Hank didn't know Walt.
Right.
There was a real, and I wondered about this, and I get your take. The episode, I think it was maybe 2 episodes ago, where Philip gets ready to leave to go for harvest, and he gives Stan the hug. And I saw online there's like this real debate of, was that a genuine hug or is that Philip being manipulative? And in my mind, I feel like that's a genuine hug of friendship, that Philip can't tell Stan the truth, but really sees Stan's not a bad guy. And there's a lot of moments of that I think that relationship maybe is Philip's only, now after Stavros, and maybe Stan's his only friend.
What's interesting for me with Philip and Stan is that I think it's rare to see, although I'm sure if I could think about a couple examples maybe. On one hand, I think Philip is very genuine with Stan as far as and I think that's happened over the course of time. If this is like early in the Americans, I would say no. It's purely about putting on an act for him, and with the potential that here's an FBI agent across the street, we may, foster this relationship. We may be able to put it to some use at some point. I think that gave way to becoming a genuine friendship between them, in Philip's mind as well. But he has to do that while balancing putting up a pretense the whole time, and then he has these lines where he means something else, and there's that part of him that wants to say it, but he can't. So at that episode where he's about to leave, I guess it is Harvest, the Thanksgiving one, and the pausing is intentional of when he's going to answer like what's really wrong, and he could certainly. I almost expect him to talk about the fact that their marriage is in trouble, because it is, without having to get some. But you can just see, and I think that's also why Stan knows there's something up, because I think the stuff is coming more to the surface with Philip, and it's like he's retained it for so long. It's going to be tough. I think I'm really worried about how that's going to go down. Not worried from I think they're going to not be able to stick the landing. I'm just worried because I genuinely like these characters and care about them.
Absolutely, and I've the last couple episodes, in a perverse way, what you were saying earlier, that we've become accustomed to going, oh, what's the body count going to be, or what's the carnage going to be from all this? In a perverse way, I did feel that, and it played into that. And now, although I don't see it totally happening, I find myself uncharacteristically saying I've loved these characters in the show that I want a happy ending. I don't see it possible.
Yeah.
But, I want it. I don't want to see the car crash. I know it's probably coming, but probably at the beginning of the season, I wanted to see the car crash. And I really think the way they've sculpted Elizabeth, they brought me back around to where I want a happy ending, even though it probably won't happen.
Yeah, and I love that even in this last episode, unless something, and presumably something will change. Actually, no, something has to actually happen and change this in the next episode, just based on history. The fact that Elizabeth has finally, even though we have all these memories of her when she was younger and being instructed and before she goes to America and whatever, and which I didn't mind at all. I thought that was very interesting. But the fact that she actually did the right thing, betrayed the center and the KGB and got and put in the works the process of getting the information that was supposed to go to Oleg, and that would go back and rip apart this whole the whole conspiracy. And the fact that by Stan and then nabbing Oleg and having that means that hasn't gotten to anyone yet.
Right.
And so right now, and in this episode when she's telling Claudia everything, it's like no, because it's that great dramatic thing where you think you've done something and you're gonna realize, but you don't know that it hasn't happened. And it was very. I was enjoying how frustrated I was with that. It was like a good frustration, like if she only knew. But obviously, since Gorbachev doesn't get overthrown, so that's one of the tricky things about being actually, taking place in the real world. Now, whether Stan plays a part in helping or not, which would seem strange, or somehow the information gets to the right people in another way. I don't know, but
I think we have to say, don't we? Like, what is Margot Martindale going to do next? I mean, because when she cuts Elizabeth in that scene about you've just destroyed all the work you've ever done, and even though we clearly are not rooting for her, she still lands one. She still lands a punch on Elizabeth.
Oh yeah,
and what another great role for Margot Martindale. I mean, what a great character.
Yeah, she's one of those actresses that even when she's in a crappy sitcom like she was like a year or two ago, she's still good. She's just one of those go-to people. She's always good. And it was interesting because usually in scenes with Elizabeth, when she's arguing or confronted with everything, she doesn't back off. She doesn't stay silent. She'll, as we see what happens with Paige later, which a scene I didn't see coming, and was really that was really something, I thought, actually, when her daughter basically calls her a whore.
Oh yeah,
and then she finally, she finally lays it out about how they view everything and how they've done and what they've had to do, and I thought that was like a fascinating explanation for what her character has done for the past 6 seasons, as far as like the sex and everything else. Although she could oh, by the way, your dad has done the same stuff for years now.
Yeah, with the girl, your age or not much.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, really creepy.
Yeah, go ask your father about someone named Martha.
Yeah, because his other wife.
Yeah, think what I've done so bad.
So let me ask you just a couple of questions before we get out of here.
Okay.
Do you believe Renee, Stan's wife, is a spy?
Here's the thing. The only reason to even bother casting someone who's recognizable and is at least something of a name as Laurie Holden. Is that her name? I just said she's a name.
Yeah.
I almost forgot her name. Because, people, I guess a lot of people know her from Walking Dead. I think it's funny because she actually played a significant part in the final season of The Shield, right up until the last episode. And so I think it's funny that she's been hanging around on the outskirts of this final season of The Americans. You hire that actress, number one. And number two, the whole thing about her wanting to work at the FBI of all places. And she keeps coming back to that and coming back to that. It would be a rather big red herring if she didn't turn out to be a spy. I won't fault them for it. I would be like, oh, you just decided to screw with us. Like, here's this shiny ball. Focus on this while you're not noticing something else is going on. I think I've said it somewhere, or maybe it was online or something. Although part of me thinks the final scene of the show should deal specifically with the Jennings and whatever happens with them, there's part of me that could also see a moment of Stan and Renee, in bed or something, him sleeping, and her getting up, and hey, look, guess who's got a little basement operation just like the Jennings across the street, or something like that. Something just to let us know, hey, she's been part of this all along. I'm still gonna say she is. I won't mind if she turns out she's not, but they're certainly making us think. They're certainly leading us down that path, which therefore makes me think they're gonna take a left turn and watch. She gets killed. Show me when I gets killed.
Solve it all. The interesting thought I've had about it is this whole show is rooted in the paranoia of that time.
Yeah,
and the way that we're paranoid about her is indicative of that time and the fear of Soviet infiltration and such. Mm-hmm. But if she turned out not to be, it's a great sort of meta statement about what it was like to live during that.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that. The only other thought I have, even though I can't conceive of how you could create a plot like that in such a short amount of time, and this is probably not going to make sense to most people, but you've seen the movie. I'm gonna go out on the. You've seen the movie The Sting, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so there's a relatively minor character in The Sting, or a seemingly minor character in The Sting. Okay. Oh, by the way, I'm about to spoil something about The Sting, so if anyone out there has not seen it, and it's very possible, it's an old movie. I know by today's standards, it's an old movie. It's from 1973 or so. So I love the movie. Please go see it, and if that's the case, skip the next minute or so of this podcast because you don't want to be spoiled on this little aspect of it. Okay.
And as an aside to that,
yeah,
my mother purchased the vinyl album soundtrack for The Sting and still has it. So it was a popular movie in my house.
We had the vinyl version in my house too. In between Clapton and the Beatles, my mother played the Sting soundtrack for me all the time. I can whistle pretty much all the different themes that I've done throughout that. I won't do that now though. Okay, so I'm assuming anyone who doesn't want to be spoiled already left. Okay, so there's this running little character and thing. It's this waitress that Robert Redford character encounters a couple times when he's kind of just having a late night meal, and one thing leads to another, and they end up sleeping together, and he stays there out, whatever, and it's kind of, and of course, and someone could be really cynical. It's like, really, someone who looks like Robert Redford could do better than that. But anyway, so then there's a scene later on where, and that's how she's been presented, and she's approaching him, walking down the street towards him, and, he's happy to see her, and all of a sudden someone comes from behind her, someone that we've seen lurking in the shadows earlier, and kills her. And you think, oh, Jesus Christ, what just happened? And then all of a sudden we see in her hand that she had a gun. She had been the actual killer all along, that they had been told of, that a hired killer who was looking for him. And so it turned out she'd been, this bad, evil character, from the get-go. And I kind of can imagine a Stan, Renee, Philip kind of a scene where Philip ends up having to kill Renee because she's just about to do something to Stan. But then I'm like, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Why would she? She just got into the FBI and she's an infiltrator. Why would she kill him? So I don't even know why I brought that up.
Which is an interesting analog to Elizabeth shooting Tatiana, trying to kill Nestorenko.
Okay, go on.
No, I thought, it's interesting. The person who was supposed to kill him ends up being the one who saves him and shoots a character we'd seen previously. And I went back and watched it again to make sure, and then checked the credits and did but that was Tatiana that Elizabeth shot and killed.
Oh yeah. I thought it might have been her when we first see her, and then when they did the lingering close up on her, okay, that's definitely her. Which is why they showed her in the previously on the Americans in the beginning. It was just to remind us about her.
Right.
I didn't know she actually did field work. I hadn't gotten that impression from that character before, or if she did, I don't remember it because it was a few years ago. But I liked how they kind of I liked how that also knit things together because it's not just what you just said about Elizabeth actually killing a person who was going to kill the person that she was supposed to be killing, but also the fact that you have Oleg, who was kind of like in opposition to Tatiana. We saw them like on the college campus a few episodes ago, and she already knew that he was. We know that she's part of the conspiracy,
right?
And the fact that she's the one who ends up getting killed, meanwhile Oleg's in custody and everything else all happening at the same time. I thought that was rather fascinating.
And kind of the dark humor of it is that when she confronts Oleg, she says, "You screwed up my operation. You're the reason he did it." And because he gave the information to Philip and Elizabeth was then guarding, like she's foiled again. I mean, it's almost like she's the tragic character who can't complete her mission because of these people. So,
right. And also, finally, I also loved in this last episode how there were a couple different storylines, things that we were watching, which I think, at least I'm definitely one, but I felt that way for both of them. There were storylines where I was like, either Philip and or Elizabeth could be caught. And, well, the Philip one was more obvious because it's a literal chase scene. And I really thought, wait, is he actually going to get caught? Because it had that kind of feeling to it. But I was also kept thinking Elizabeth could get caught, which is funny because Elizabeth is actually doing the quote unquote right thing because she's actually standing, what's the word? Doing surveillance duty on the guy, but she's doing that as a means to protect him, as opposed to being an assassin. And I kept thinking, oh, it'd be really screwed up if this is when they actually land on Elizabeth, right when she's like, no, you don't understand. It's the opposite of what you think,
Right.
I kind of, but neither thing went that way, thankfully, because again, the show, they're much smarter than I am. So.
Right. Well, I guess the last thought I have is, I thought it was really interesting the simplicity of his code red to Elizabeth. I'm not going to be home for dinner. Things are kind of topsy-turvy.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I loved it. I thought it was such a, banal statement and then she springs into action and, I guess I can wait for the last episode because I know it's going to be the last episode, but I can't wait. And where it left us now, I mean, there's really a lot of forward motion. Action.
Oh yeah. Now it's sped up, and The Americans isn't a show that necessarily goes at breakneck speed ever, but that's what's been happening these last few episodes. The pacing has been escalating throughout the season. Whether it's Stan in pursuit of them, whether it's the missions that are increasingly going awry. I mean, Elizabeth hasn't been a raving success at her job this year, and bringing Philip in clearly didn't do any good either. I love the fact that we're going into a final episode, and there's a million questions we have of what they're going to do as far as how they're going to resolve certain storylines, how people are going to react. Paige, Henry, as you were saying, Paige also, because Paige has to eventually be told about, hey, the people we're working for, maybe not such a good idea.
Right.
And I couldn't begin to guess what they're going to do. I mean, we all have our theories. Why is Philip wearing that suit? I don't, buying a new suit at this point. I haven't made up my mind about that. I know we have friends who've had theories. I'm not a big fan of them because I don't understand why that would be the reason for it. But there's got to be a reason. If they don't do anything with that damn suit, I'm gonna be like, okay, what? If he's got money problems, why is he getting a suit?
Right. No, the only, as I've stated without going into full detail, the only fear I have with the focus on money troubles for Philip and the sort of series of goodbyes, or if you will, 12-step amends Philip has made to try to go to Stavros one last time and say, hey, man, I'm really sorry, and trying to call Henry, and the focus so much this season on how the business isn't working out that that forebodes to me. The emphasis put on that really makes me worried that Philip has done something to try to provide for at least Henry and maybe the family. If he doesn't make it.
Well, I may be wrong about this. I feel like I remember reading something a while ago that pretty much said this show is not going to have a happy ending.
I recall that too.
Now, again, just because someone says that doesn't, even if it's the show's creators, don't make it so. We've seen creators say, we're not going to blah, 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 final season, final episode. And then they go right ahead and do it anyway. Because they're
not going to do time travel.
Yeah. So, they were dead all. No, I'm just kidding. They weren't, but they were. No. But part of me, I kind of feel it's hard not to feel that it's going to have more of a tragic end, but with some hope as well. But I don't know. I mean, they're not going to. I don't think they're going to Bonnie and Clyde us here.
Right.
That would just be like no. Maybe no, but the problem is what they've done. It depends. I don't know. They could be considered heroes if they help save the whole Gorbachev thing, or maybe just like Spies Brother, they're never recognized for their hand in doing that, which is the way I think it's going to be. I don't think they're going to get any sort of recognition for helping to foil this whole thing. Does that mean that they end up in the custody of the feds? Do they end up having to go into witness protection themselves? Do they end up in I can't imagine they'll be in prison. That just seems weird to me. I don't know.
The interesting thing about this is, even if you give them a happy ending with all that's happened, the betrayal of Stan, Henry being the only one. Imagine he's the only one in the family that doesn't know. How was he going to feel about that?
Oh yeah,
and even a happy ending has big ramifications emotionally for several of the characters we care about.
It's hard with everything that's been put into motion, whether it be Philip and Elizabeth, whether it be the kids, whether it be if the FBI does realize beyond Stan's suspicion that they are Russian spies, what happens to Stan as a result of that? Because wait, these are the guys that you've been living across the street from all this time, and you're like your best buddies when playing racquetball and yada yada yada, sharing family dinners. How does he keep his career?
Well, I was going to say, think about Gad. When the Martha thing happened with Gad, it pretty much cost him his career. So
right.
How does Stan? And conversely, I mean, Dennis has had dinner with them and said to Stan, "Oh, the Jennings, they're fine." And
Yep.
you know,
I haven't looked to see if the episode is longer than normal. I mean, I know this last one was, I think, a touch longer. I think it was like 10 minutes extra. I hope it is. I hope they give us some extra time just to be able to process everything, and maybe because I want as many more minutes with them as possible. But yeah, looking forward to it. It's that one I may try to make a point of watching in real time.
I'm going to definitely try.
Yeah, I mean, at most I might let it go like 5 minutes ahead. That way I can just watch it and then zip through the commercials as it's playing. So that way I can just watch it all together, but still be done in time to not get spoiled online or wherever else people get spoiled.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, spoilers now, but I can't imagine a show that I would be more disappointed to be spoiled on right now than The Americans.
As far as shows that are on right now, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, not all time.
No, not all time. But of anything I'm watching right now, it's the one that I want to not be spoiled on more than any.
Oh yeah, it's right now. It's the best. I think it's the best show I'm watching right now.
I mean, totally agree.
And I thought Legion would be a little bit closer to it. No, it's not. Yeah, so good. Okay, all right. I suspected once I said we were gonna maybe chat about the Americans. Like I already put a bench. Like, oh, we're gonna go over 2 hours. So if you enjoyed listening to this podcast about Legion, and guess what, the Americans too, you'll probably enjoy hanging out on our Facebook page, where we talk about shows like Legion and the Americans too. You can find us on the Facebook as someone cuts their something. You can find us on or sharpen. Are you sharpening your knives? That's what Dan does before he goes killing. Serious TV Drama Podcast. Type into Facebook, like the page, join the conversation. You can find us on iTunes the very same way. Serious TV Drama Podcast. Subscribe to our feed and rate and review us there if you like. You can also just punch in Serious TV Drama Podcast in Google, and you can probably find 1,800 other ways to find us and listen to us. Even YouTube, apparently. Sometimes, I guess. And you can also follow us on Twitter. Every once in a blue moon, we tweet something. Our handle there is at STVD Podcast. That's STVD as in Serious TV Drama. Unlike someone in a recent other podcast who referred to us as the Serious Drama TV Podcast, which no wonder they forgot I was there that week, and they couldn't even get the order of our podcast right. They'll never hear this. I don't care. Anyway, it's really late. Brian, Mr. Hewlett, I want to thank you profusely for being able to step in and really chat it up about Legion and the Americans. It was great being able to talk to you. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I totally appreciate it. You and I have been simpatico on television shows for some time, and it was a real treat. Thanks for having me.
I look forward to re-listening to the file and seeing if it sounds as good as I think it did, which probably means, well, no, I'm just kidding. Anyway, let me think. A couple things going on with the podcast. We need to renew our subscription because right now it hasn't been renewed for a year for the podcast. So we have to make sure we get that done because otherwise I won't even be able to post this damn thing. So we've got our own little cliffhanger. Maybe no one will ever hear this podcast. Other cliffhangers. I'm not sure. Dan might return and we might do the rest of the season of Legion together. He might not. There's a time of year when the weather gets warmer. Dan likes to roam the open country and murder. I mean, with the kayaking and mountaining and whatever else he does, because he's Mr. Activity. Which works out because this is when TV tends to wind down anyway. We kind of tend to slow down our output for the summer, so that Legion starting later is why we're kind of pushing it into June. So we'll see. Brian, I'll let you know if we might need your services again. Depends on how Dan is feeling. Other than that, I think the only other podcast we might do, we might want to do one wrapping up all the comic book TV shows. That might happen. We had talked about doing one about Infinity War, but now it's one of those, as the weeks go on, I always feel silly talking about a movie like a month or two after it came out, so I don't know if that's actually going to happen now. Probably won't. Other than that, I don't really know what... We may very well take off the summer, pretty much. We shall see. But we'll worry about that when the time comes. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking because I'm tired and I'm rambling. So again, thank you, Brian. Thank you to everyone out there for listening, and have a good night.
Have a good night, everyone.